Hello, welcome to the Historical Boxing Society podcast. This is the historical overview of the British fighter Denver Ed Smith. Denver Ed Smith was one of the very first foreign fighters to invade America, as he came here at a very, very young age. And somehow, for a British man, he got the nickname Denver Ed Smith. Today, we're going to introduce Denver Ed Smith through a reading in our Book of Boxing, and we're going to get some words from the very own Joe Choyinski, as he recalls his tales with many of these young, very early pioneer fighters. And in today's Book of Boxing readings, we are going to get a very unflattering introduction to one Denver Ed Smith. Here's a picture of Denver Ed Smith. As you can see, he had a disposition of a street thug, rather mean, menacing type of a face, and rather highly aggressive type of demeanor. And we're going to start here with this reading. It was after 10 when the two big men, broad shoulders as oxen, huge in throws and quick as tigers, faced each other at the clang of the bell. You could see the thoroughbred racehorse in every move of Choyinski. His sinews were ribbed like washboards, and his breasts were mapped with seamed muscles of brawn. Smith was round and loggy and British, but fight, why, the man knew nothing else. You could see it in the thick overhang of his forehead, the monkey-like set of ears, and the fierce mop of bristles that stood above his brow like forest above a cliff. He was a biter, an eye-gouger, and thoroughly a bruiser in appearance. The other was built in a different mold. He was tall, slender-legged, small-dyed, hook-nosed. His hair was long like a football player's below the shoulders, and he looked like a very scientific man. The brute was a coward. There were applause for the prize fighters and applause for the brute. One smiled, the other looked white and solemn like a dead poker in a butcher's wagon. Smith had Peter Maher for his chief second, while Tom Sharkey and Bob Armstrong were in the corner of Joe Choyinski. With the clang of the gong, I proceeded to give Smith a terrible thumping. Now, these are the words of Joe Choyinski. He fought with a crouch. On his face was the most ferocious expression I had ever saw. He had a savage temper, and every blow I landed increased his rage even more. In the first round, I knocked Smith to a sitting position, and he got up cursing after a 4-second count. From then on to the middle of the fourth round, Smith fought like a barroom bruiser. He made one wild lunge after the other. Whatever he got close enough to grapple me with his huge gorilla-like arms, he used every foul method known. He butted me repeatedly with his head, drew his glove laces across my face, used his elbows, knees, and the heel of his glove, tried to gouge out my eyes. Smith himself was covered with blood from the punching I had given him, but he lunged in one rush after another, cursing like a wild man, meant to cause destruction, Twice in the fourth round, he butted me with his goatish forehead, loosening several of my teeth. The crowd yelled, "Foul, foul, kill him, Joe, put him out." I shook Smith with a fearful right hook to the jaw, and as he lunged forward, he grappled me, threw his right leg around me, and tried to wrestle me to the ground. At this point, the referee stopped the travesty and ordered Smith to his corner and awarded me the fight. The crowd showed its approval by a deafening roar of applause. In justice to Peter Maher, who in Smith's corner, it did not please him that he did not approve of Smith's dirty tactics. In the fourth round, he threw down his towel as he had been carrying the Denverite and quit his corner in disgust. A year later, I met Denver Ed Smith again in Philadelphia and knocked him cold in the third round. So that was our introduction to one Denver Ed Smith. Rather unflattering bruiser type of a menacing approach to fighting one Joe Choyinski. Okay, so Denver Ed Smith was one of the most colorful renegades of the early boxers, and he was a great British boxer, as it did not take a Denver Ed Smith very long to leave Britain and travel to America. And although Denver Ed Smith was not part of the Australian invasion, I tend to lump him in with them as he was one of the very first foreign fighters in the early heavyweight history. Denver Ed Smith got into America in the summer of 1884, very close to when the Maher Giant arrived with Jem Smith in August 1883. So this was the following summer when Denver Ed Smith arrived. This early fame must have been when he got some of the training from Jem Mace, who was supposedly having trained Denver Ed Smith in a way making him very Australian in that respect. Denver Ed Smith had an association with three legendary figures: William Muldoon, who trained John L. Sullivan at times, Jem Mace, and of course, for a short time, he was controlled by the Western known as Bat Masterson. In fact, Denver Ed, much like Sharkey, had a very memorable encounter with one Bat Masterson. And the story goes like this. This was during Denver Ed Smith's first encounter, the biggest fight of his life. And it happened with the barrier champion Joe Goddard, who was considered unbeatable, and Denver Ed Smith was one of the first individuals to beat Goddard. In fact, Denver Ed Smith holds a real treasure of a legacy in that he was one of the very first fighters to knock out Joe Goddard cold, is what he did in his first match, as he knocked Goddard unconscious, which is almost incredibly difficult to do, and he did it very late in the match with late power. So how is Bat Masterson involved with Denver Ed Smith? Well, Bat Masterson was in the corner of Denver Ed Smith for the Joe Goddard fight, and Denver Ed had gone down multiple times due to Goddard's rush. In fact, Goddard almost put him out, and I think it was the seventh round. He had him down twice, and Denver Ed slipped out of the round. In the 10th round, having a fear for the bets that Bat Masterson had made with all of his friends, as they had a bet on their fighter, Denver Ed Smith. When Smith came back to the corner in the 10th round, Bat Masterson brandished his gun and told him, if you don't start trying a little bit harder, there's going to be some serious trouble when this match is over. And Denver, Ed Smith, looked at Masterson, and he had absolute fear that Masterson was going to attempt to murder him with the gun if he lost all the bets for his investors, as the pressure was pretty severe on Bat Masterson to cover the bets, as there was probably large amounts of money involved. And the fear was such that it installed a new life in Denver Ed Smith, who went out and fought for his life like a tiger, and he took it to Joe Goddard and turned the tables on one barrier champion, Joe Goddard, and produced for himself at the age of 27 one of the all-time great wins in history, as it was probably absolutely a fight of the decade, as it had a multiple 5, 6, 7 knockdowns between the two men as they went back and forth. And in fact, one particular stretch, Goddard went down, then the next round Smith went down, then the next round Goddard went down, back and forth, like that good of action. The fight of the decade for sure. And Smith is one of these fighters with very low competitive rounds fought. In fact, he has under 50, as there's quite a few of these pioneer fighters that were coming from just a different time frame, and they didn't quite have it was much harder to get matches, and they just don't quite have the competitive rounds that other boxers have. John L. Sullivan being one of them, not very high competitive rounds, and that doesn't diminish their skill, though, as they do have some skill, and Denver Ed is solely ranked this high in the pantheon of these boxer countdowns based on his win of one Joe Goddard. So obviously he had the ability to beat Joe Goddard, and that makes his potential so high of a ceiling that this is where he ends up. So Denver Ed Smith, as a boxer, very much resembled James J. Jeffries, as he fought from a crouch, and he attacked similar to Jeffries, and often was termed as awkward in the press. He sprang up out of the crouch and landed in close range, and he was a hard man to jab in such a crouch manner that many fighters were forced to mix it up with him at close range, which is what Smith wanted. He had Kid Carter type of power, TNT power, and much like Carter, could rebound from knockdowns and multiple knockdowns and to swing momentum in a bout into his favor. A tremendous attribute that possessed Denver Ed Smith was durability and the energy of the youth to often in his career turn the tides of a fight, such as he did with Joe Goddard. And very much his other famous bout was with George Godfrey, in which he administered one of the most severe beatdowns of Godfrey's career, knocking Godfrey clear out of the ring. And the fight ended with Denver Ed Smith's head coming in contact with a brick wall as he went down, obviously concussed from a concussion. And the referee attempted to stop the fight at that very moment because he was bleeding from the skull from the point of where his head hit the brick wall. And Denver Ed Smith, even with all of that going on, still wanted to continue the bout, but the referee would not let him. That was the street thug mentality that Denver Ed Smith had, as he was a very dangerous man and very aggressive in close range contact. Just for a reference here on just Denver Ed Smith's potential, I ran him through simulations of a lot of these early pioneers, as we have a tournament for John L. Sullivan in the year 1887. So Denver Ed Smith would be the very youngest of that crowd. He was below Paddy Cardiff, below Joe McAuliffe, below Pat Killian below Jim Smith. He's below all these guys in age with 22 years old in 1887. So he would be very, very green when he would take on John L. Sullivan in that year. So I'm going to give for you like a quick little six-pack result of Denver Ed Smith versus some of the early Pioneer fighters here as we get a chance to just see how simulation views him versus these other early Pioneer fighters, as Denver Ed Smith missed all these early fighters during his career. As I stated, he's got very limited competitive rounds fought. So his first match was with Thompson, Marvin Thompson, knocked down on both sides. A very tough match. Denver Ed Smith win in a 15-round split decision. The next match, Denver Ed Smith versus Joe McAuliffe. A-plus match. Denver Ed Smith went down in the 8th round. A very close fight, and the results of the match, a draw. So Denver Ed Smith does not complete the circuit that he's trying to go through, the first heavyweights. Next, we have Denver Ed Smith versus Pat Killian. Killian went down in the 10th, and then the fight was stopped. Results of the match, Denver Ed Smith win TKO in 10 over Pat Killian. Next, Denver Ed Smith versus Patsy Cardiff. Cardiff down twice in the 14th round and twice in the next round. 15-round win, Denver Ed Smith. Then we have Denver Ed Smith versus Jake Kilrain. Denver Ed Smith with a win at the end of the 7th round, a TKO win over Jake Kilrain. Finally, we have a Denver Ed Smith versus one of the guys that he was compared with, Tom Sharkey, a 15-round draw with Sharkey. In the 7th round, Sharkey went down, and in the 8th round, Smith was down twice. And the 10th round, Sharkey goes down again as the fight momentum shifts. The 13th round, both went down 2 times. Sharkey dominates the 13th round, the 14th round even, and the 15th round. Both were tired as the fight ends. Results of the match, close. Sharkey, a close 15-round win over Denver. Sharkey's floored multiple times in that match as one of the great simulations of all times. Is a very close match. Next, we have a Denver Ed Smith versus a guy that would be perfect for him, Marvin Hart, both awkward fighters. And the results of this was Denver Ed Smith down in round 4. From the 5th on, the fight was very close, very fast. Hart drops Denver Ed in round 12. Denver Ed may have had a slight lead when this happened. Hart was down in round 14, and Smith catches him with late power. The last round, results of the match, 15-round draw with Marvin Hart. Denver Ed Smith and Marvin Hart, 15-round draw. Finally, we have one last simulation that I want to give to you. Denver Ed Smith versus Hank Griffin, who's coming up very quick in the countdown. After the 9th round, Griffin went down after a very close fight. Denver Ed Smith, 9th round knockout over Hank Griffin. So you can see by the simulation, Denver Ed Smith is right in the wheelhouse of having a little bit lower level Class B fighter. Kind of real close to Marvin Hart, not quite competitive enough of Tom Sharkey. Certainly much better fighter than the Jake Kilrain, Patsy Cardiff, Joe McAuliffe type of fighters. But still enough vulnerability to struggle against getting a draw with Joe McAuliffe, as he's not quite able, to be separated enough by a different tier of a class, real class A fighter, which he definitely was not. So Denver Ed Smith would be a low-level Class B fighter, just the same as a lot of these fighters that are going to get grouped up right next to him as a lower-level Class B fighters. As one of the first things that I always think of Denver Ed Smith as is the youth, as he always had the youth on his advantage, as he really fell apart after the Goddard bout. Denver Ed Smith is one of these very select few of fighters who were not able to capitalize on their prestige, both in the Godfrey match that earned him prestige and in the Goddard match that happened to him. He spent month after month looking for a big name opponent and trying to get a fight, as Smith was definitely trying to get a fight with James Corbett and also Bob Fitzsimmons. Month after month they tried to get stuff arranged, as he had major prestige beating Joe Goddard as one of the top heavyweights of that time frame that he was in at post Joe Goddard, and nothing ever materialized, and instead Smith just wasted away his youth and his prime, and when he did attempt to try and go back like years removed, he was just too rusty to be effective. So Smith, I always remember him as being a youthful fighter, and just remember if he were to take on John L. Sullivan just post Patsy Cardiff in January of 1887, he would be the youngest of all the fighters at 22 years of age, as he was already in America coming from Britain. As I stated, he had came over here in the summer of 1884, so he was already getting established. So Denver Ed Smith, this is your boxing profile will be coming up as we explore the career of one of the most colorful renegades of boxing's pioneer era, the British fighter Denver Ed Smith.